Could it be that's why you never have references to any such things with the people of Israel? And when they are judged, they're judged for major issues. You have Jeremiah 17 where God speaks through the prophet Jeremiah, telling the people not to carry loads on the Sabbath. And the specific context is people carrying loads for various commerce and work they're doing on the Sabbath. From that, Rabbinic Judaism developed traditions that led to my being told I couldn't bring tissues with me to the synagogue because I'd be carrying on the Sabbath. And Yeshua himself goes against that tradition in his own day. John 5. He heals a man that's been lame for 38 years. And what does he tell him? Pick up your mat. Why not just leave your mat there, get it another day? You've been healed, just walk away. In fact, you don't even need that mat to lay there anymore. Why does Yeshua tell him to pick up the mat? Because he's exposing how human tradition gets in the way of the true meaning of Sabbath and the true power of God. How do we know it? Because later on, some religious leaders see him. Instead of saying, my God, you're walking. You've been crippled 38 years. What a miracle. Praise God. Who did this? Oh, by the way, you shouldn't carry your mat. But this is a miracle. This is incredible. No, that's not what happens. They see this guy walking for the first time in 38 years. And what do they say? Who told you to carry your mat? God does those kinds of things historically. To this day, I believe he does them in the midst of his people to see, are we following him and his word, or are we caught up with our own man-made traditions? I think Jeremiah would have been stunned if you told him, by the way, the words that you prophesied about, don't carry any loads on the Sabbath, will one day be interpreted to mean that you can't carry tissue paper to blow your nose. Well, hang on. What if you have to carry a prayer book, or what if you have to a prayer shawl or something like, and you're going to the synagogue? Well, then the rabbis constructed this thing called an eruv. It would be designated space that would somehow now not be in violation of the Sabbath. There's a whole tractate in the Talmud about this. Not just a whole tractate about Shabbat, Sabbath observance, and the 39 subdivisions of law based on Sabbath, but there's a whole tractate just on the eruvs. So it's kind of an imaginary sacred space, you could say, so that, okay, there's an eruv here, so that in this courtyard, if you live on the side of the courtyard and you're walking over to the synagogue, you can actually carry there because it's not considered carrying. I think Jeremiah would have been stunned. Anyway, to return to this first point, the scriptures indicate clearly that God's covenant with Israel was based on the written word alone. You can go all the way through the Hebrew scriptures in terms of covenant obligations, in terms of God calling his people to account, in terms of references to the covenant. It is the written word always, most clearly emphasized in the Pentateuch itself. As Dan Gruber says, on the basis of what is recorded in the Tanakh, there was no oral law given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. So I did a few things just to do some careful searches. For example, when I looked at the term in Deuteronomy 12:21, kasher tzviticha, as I commanded you, I just looked up that phrase or like phrases or like grammatical use in the Torah and found that every single time, I've got tons of references, every single time you've got this as I commanded you, it's always referring to something that immediately precedes in the text. So I just did some little searches here. Did a search of the name Moses in the Tanakh, beginning with the book of Joshua to the end of the Hebrew Scriptures. I looked up every phrase such as the Lord said to Moses, the Lord commanded Moses, Moses commanded, Moses said, Moses assigned. And every single instance, reference is made to something that's written in the 5 books of Moses. So throughout the entire Tanakh, after the 5 books, from Joshua on, if it ever says Moses said, Moses commanded, Moses wrote, any phrase like that, you can always find the reference to something in the 5 books. Always. That's the only law of Moses they had. You would think if there were all these oral traditions, they'd be making constant reference to them. Not so. Here's another set of verses, all of which contain the Hebrew word katuv, it is written, emphasizing the authority of the written Torah. So from Joshua 1:8, it's the book of the law. Do what's in accordance with all that's written in it. Joshua 8:31, 8:34, 1 Kings 2:3, 2 Kings 14:6, 2 Kings 22:13, 23:21, Ezra 3:2, Ezra 3:4, Nehemiah 8:15, Nehemiah 10:34, 10:36, 2 Chronicles 23:18, 2 Chronicles 25:4, 2 Chronicles 35, 30:18, 31:3, 34:21, 35:12, 35:26. Over and over and over and over and over. It's always in accordance with what is written in the law of the Lord. Why, when they're referring to the law of the Lord and they're speaking of the law of the Lord, why is it always as it is written? Because it was a book. Because there was no oral tradition given to Moses. Because there was nothing else they could refer to coming from Moses except that which was written in a book. Let's go on. I'll go quickly. Number 2, there are no explicit or implicit references to the oral Torah within the written Torah. We saw, for example, that one of the most famous, Deuteronomy 12:21, just refers back to earlier verses in the same chapter, not to an alleged oral command given. I'll give you one other example. Exodus chapter 34. Exodus 34, as Moses is receiving new stone tablets on Mount Sinai, verse 27, then the Lord said to Moses, write down these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. This is used to point to the oral law. You say, wait. Doesn't it say right? Write down these words. How is this an alleged hint of the oral law? Simple. The Hebrew says al pi, which is according to. Al pi, these words. I've made a covenant with you in Israel. The rabbinic tradition interpreted al pi as if it was on the mouth of, meaning according to the tenor of. In other words, according to the oral explanation of these words, I've made a covenant. So remarkably, contrary to virtually every major Jewish translation and contrary to every major Hebrew lexicon, which simply understands al pi here to mean according to, this verse that says write down these words is now interpreted with reference to the oral law. I mean, it's an amazing thing. What the Hebrew doesn't say, what the grammar doesn't say, what the text does not say, is what the rabbis ultimately put their emphasis on. And the fact that the whole emphasis is on write down these words, for in accordance with these words, which ones? The words written down, I've made a covenant with you, and now becomes interpreted to mean, quite impossibly, write down these words, for in accordance with the oral explanation of these words, I've made a covenant with you. I mean, you even have verses, for example, like Exodus 24. Exodus 24, where the book of the covenant is written. Moses is told by the Lord. Here, God speaks to Moses, comes down from the mountain. Verse 3, Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws. Notice all. And they responded with one wise voice. Everything the Lord has said we will do. Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. If you just go through all those references as we reference them for the first argument against the oral law, you'll see it's God speaks, Moses tells the people,